have seen people ranking RPGs by their crunchiness, or positioning them on a scale of narrative versus combat focus. That kind of thing may or may not be helpful. Sometimes it's not very well defined what crunchiness means to different people, or whether combat and narrative are mutually exclusive. Well, with that said, here's my attempt at arranging some of my GM-less games on a decidedly imperfect scale. On this end are what I'll call more mechanical games. They tend to involve more dice rolling to propel you through a story. They tend to have more rules for gameplay, and there's usually some combat involved. They tend to be closer to what you might think of as traditional role-playing games. And on the other end here are what I'd call more prompt-based games. They tend to give you scenarios, or ask questions for you to decide how that situation gets resolved, and then you record it in some way, like a journal. They tend to be more focused on creative writing than traditional role-playing. There's a slight tendency for mechanical games to be darker, and for prompt games to be more cozy. Like I said, this is not a perfect ranking system. But in the middle of my imperfect scale here is Colostle by Nich Angell. In some ways, it's a classic fantasy adventure game. Your hero strikes out from their home to explore a strange and dangerous world. They'll delve into dungeons and do battle with monsters on their quest. Yet the way most of these situations are generated is by getting prompts that inspire you to write a journal entry at the end of each adventuring day. It's not dark, and it's not cozy. It's bright and quirky. The premise of the setting is that the entire world is inside a colossal castle with rooms the size of countries. House-sized mechanical rooks roam the countryside as a constant threat. And inside those are tiny rooklings that you can collect as pets. As far as you know, no one knows what's outside the Colostle. There's a section in the book that tells you not to read it until you've reached the battlements. I purposefully haven't read it, but I'd be forgiven for suspecting that what you might find outside the Colossal is an even more colossal castle. Colostle comes as a beautiful and fairly short hardback. Actually, it comes as two. The first is a base rulebook. It covers character creation, exploration across land and sea and cities, and it covers combat against the animated castle-like rooks and human enemies as well. It's enough to get started with the game, but the second, Roomlands, fills in the gaps. It adds more classes, biomes, and locations like cracks between rooms, the rafters high in the sky, and the great city of Parapet. It adds rules for turning rooks into mobile homes, rules for two-player co-op, rules to expand combat, and oracles. And it adds a guided adventure you can either slot into your story or start it with. Both books are full of beautiful and vibrantly printed illustrations on really high quality paper, some of the highest quality of any books I own. They are an absolute pleasure to read. So I alluded to this in the introduction, that Colossal is really a card-drawing journaling game. And so the core mechanic is actually quite simple. There's an exploration phase and a combat phase. Your character has a score for each. And for every leg of your journey through the Colossal, you draw a number of cards equal to your exploration score. And those cards give you prompts about what you discovered along the way, depending on the type of area you're in. It's up to you to tie the prompts together into a story and write a journal entry. You might need to draw other cards as well, to check the weather or to generate items you find. Sometimes an exploration prompt will lead to a combat encounter. You draw cards to build your opponent, and then the fight begins. Draw a number of cards equal to your combat score to give you a hand of options. Each card represents a type of attack and its strength. The opponent plays cards from their own hand, and you play actions from yours to counter them. It sounds quite abstract, but I find it kind of evocative, because the different suits represent different types of actions rather than specific abilities. So you're free to get creative and imagine how your fights play out in a dynamic way that might involve climbing on or inside rooks, using your equipment in interesting ways, or perhaps even a pet coming to your aid. We start with creating a character. First, you need a calling, what drives your character to adventure, and a nature, which is your character's personality. You can draw cards to generate these aspects if you like, or decide them yourself. I tried drawing and came up with a grumpy, impatient character who needs to find a powerful weapon to defend their village against the increasingly frequent rook attacks. Next, you choose your class, which gives you your exploration and combat score, as well as some flavour for how you might adventure and fight. I wouldn't get too hung up on your class choice. It's more of a starting point than something you have to stick with. Your scores will change, and you can acquire a lot of the features of other classes as you play. I chose the Armed, who is literally armed with an arm attached to them, one that came from a living rook. I thought it suited the martial theme of my calling, and I imagined the village traditions that might have bestowed this gift upon my character. And after picking up a weapon, you're off on your adventure, striding out to see what awaits. My story started with saving a camp from a rook attack by climbing inside it and swinging my weapons around. The fight rewarded me with a companion rookling who hatched from stone in the rubble of the battle. And as I posed victorious, awaiting the adoration of the people I'd saved, I rather embarrassingly got snatched by a flying gargoyle and taken to the rafters. It's a good job that I had the Runelands book at this point, because although you can get taken to the rafters in the base game, it only really says what's up there in the supplemental book. So there's a decision to make here if you're thinking about trying Colossal. It's a bit like deciding whether to get a core book or a starter set. Except usually with a starter set you get an introductory adventure and a basic version of the rules, and then if you later get the core book you kind of end up duplicating the rules you already have. Whereas with Colossal, you don't end up duplicating the rules, but you also don't get the introductory adventure unless you buy both books. Personally, I'm glad I got both books, and although I've played quite a bit and the books are quite short, I feel like there's still a lot for me to explore. And on top of those 2 core books, there are 2 other expansion books available at the moment. There's Dungeons, which adds labyrinthine substructures to explore beneath the Runelands, along with NPCs, bosses, and a new city. And there's Kyodina, which adds new East Asian-inspired locations with an overarching story and new character options. I don't have either of those expansions at the moment, but they might well deserve their own video in the future if I can get my hands on them. There's also 4 mini expansions available in the form of job packs, which are decks of cards that act as vocations to enhance your adventures. There's Cartographer, Researcher, Inventor, and Apothecary. They each supplement your exploration, combat, or discovery draws. As for third-party content, there's quite an active homebrew community on Discord, and I've even seen a couple of modules published under the Open Gaming license. The books provide plenty of exploration opportunities, but there are a few things you might find you encounter repeatedly. Loot is a good example of this. Every 5 or so exploration phases, you'll likely encounter a rook, Now, a defeated rook gives an item reward from a short list and a stat boost. It's intended that encountering a rook is a big deal, and you can avoid them if you want, but if you choose to fight them, it won't be long before you have to decide what you want to do with a second rookling, and then a third. And you only need to defeat 3 or 4 rooks without being injured before you've maxed out your stats. This also has the effect of diminishing the uniqueness of some of the classes, which is why I'd recommend considering them more like a starting loadout than an integral part of the character. The Inventor Job Pack might alleviate this a little, but only if you want your character to be an inventor. Colostle is clearly a labour of love, a task undertaken mostly by one person, Nich Angell, who, as far as I can tell, handles everything from game design to art and from world building to business. It's clearly important to them that the final product is professional and high quality, and they definitely succeed in that. I mentioned this before, but in my opinion, as a game, Colostle is a great hybrid between classic adventuring and creative journaling, and so I think it works quite well as an introduction to different genres. If you're familiar with the tropes of traditional RPGs and are curious about solo or journaling games, then Colostle might be a perfect starting point. Or perhaps if you have a friend or partner who's curious about RPGs but not ready to join a group yet, Colostle is a light-hearted, safe and simple game that the two of you can play together. It could be a gateway through the castle walls and into a whole world of new experiences. Thank you again ever so much for watching. I keep getting really encouraging feedback on these reviews. I'm aiming for a video every couple of weeks, but I've been a bit ill recently and lost my voice as well. So I'm sorry if it's a little scratchy still. I know a lot of people find these videos relaxing, so I've done my best to edit out all the coughing and other unsavoury noises. While I was ill though, I delved more into the indie RPG scene on Blue Sky. It's quite active there, with a lot of developers and creators helping each other out. So if you're interested in me sharing upcoming projects I'm excited about, or my first impressions of new games, feel free to follow me there. There's a link on my channel page and I'll put a URL below. Thank you again, and until next time, happy adventures.